Let's talk a bit about what we heard last week from the candidates. Dr. William Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University, also happens to be the co-author of News Verdict's The Debates in Presidential Campaigns, among other works, is tweeting at DRB Rosenberg. Dr. William Rosenberg. Bill, welcome back. Thanks for being here today.
Good morning, Tim.
Overall, in general, give us a sense of what you took away from the 2 nights of debates last week.
Well, the Democrats had quite the challenge. They have 25 presidential candidates now. They made rules very early on that said that only 20 candidates would be able to get into a series of debates, and they had to meet a particular threshold. And as we saw in the debates, that there really were not 10 probably truly viable candidates in both of those debates, but they simply were doing an experience where the journalists from MSNBC/NBC were asking questions almost in a press conference format that didn't last too long. The candidates sort of wanted to jump out of that and sort of challenge each other because each is really fighting for the ability to move forward in what is a very hotly contested race, probably between 5 people trailing Joe Biden. And now that Joe Biden has had some challenges from Harris, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
What I thought was interesting, too, is that when you mentioned those who try to interject themselves into the debate, there's a way to do that and a way not to. Some were more effective than others. But that may not necessarily be a best qualification for whether or not to be president of the United States. But in terms of that particular format, it seems to me that Kamala Harris did herself proudly. I don't know that Bill de Blasio did himself much good. Julian Castro actually did pretty well when he interrupted Beto O'Rourke. And there were a couple of moments. Who benefited by this format?
Well, I think that all the ones that you mentioned, and probably also Kristen Gillibrand, who seemed to be chiming in quite a bit when she wanted to have her say. I think what we have to recognize, though, is that these candidates all desperately want to be able to continue to show themselves as being viable and sort of want to put a chink in the armor of Joe Biden, who for some time now seems to be the candidate to beat, the person who's way out in front. Most of the other candidates that are in that top tier barely get to his level in terms of public opinion support. I think what we have to recognize, though, also is that these candidates are performing in an environment which is being presented by the networks, but not necessarily really trying to structure a true debate. I thought the most exciting part of the evening was when the candidates started to interrupt each other, to challenge each other, because that made it more like a debate than a press conference. And I think what we saw is that certain types of issues played better for some candidates and not so well for others. So they're also trying to generate the position of being able to speak to their issue and dominate the amount of time that was going to be allocated to them, even though it exceeded the debate limits of 45 seconds and 30 seconds. You know, the only one that sort of truly seemed to recognize that issue was Joe Biden, and I think that was much to his disservice when he said, I guess time's up.
Yeah, ironically, too, because he doesn't usually edit himself that way. Bill Rosenberg with us. I wanted to ask about the Democratic Party writ large, because what we heard from many of the candidates, if not all of the candidates, but the vast majority of them on 2 issues, one of which was on health care. And by virtue of what they were talking about with a public option is one thing, but the Medicare for all, which is, in some ways, replacing Obamacare, because that's what it would call for. The other issue is on immigration, which would decriminalize people who came into the country illegally and, in addition to that, provide health care for those individuals who are in this country illegally. And President Trump has been making this case against Republicans. Now, Democratic strategists I talked to said this may be a bridge too far for the party to go. Maybe it'll work in the primary. What's your sense of this?
Well, I think you focused on 2 very important issues that came up in the debate. One of the failures that I saw with the immigration discussion was that none of them point blank said, that under the orders of Jeff Sessions, they were going to criminalize sort of the act of coming across the border without proper documentation. I thought that would have been a much more effective attack, not only against Donald Trump, but a supportive position for the Democratic Party to hold. I think Julian Castro was very effective when he started talking about a particular provision of government regulation to decriminalize this, and it sort of threw a wrench in that discussion between Bento and Castro. But on the healthcare thing, I think what was also fascinating was it was one of those times where maybe 4 or 5 times over the 2 nights, candidates were asked to raise their hands on whether or not they would support Medicare for all option, and some of them were a little bit reluctant in terms of how they were raising their hands, and I think that's partly because they haven't totally sorted it out. People like Bernie Sanders clearly have, but Harris sort of had trouble in that area and actually went and tried to walk back her position the next day because of probably concern that she was going to lose too much of the newfound support that she just got by her attacks against Biden.
So without getting into too much of the horse race, because quite frankly, that's something that will sort itself out at some point. The next debate, I mean, your expectation, we'll have time to talk before then, but between now and then, what happens with the candidates? What do they try to do? We already saw that Joe Biden had gone to speak to Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition after the debate, and he's dealing with issues of race that Senator Cory Booker is more than happy to keep bringing up after Kamala Harris brought it up during the debate. And obviously there's questions about whether or not Beto O'Rourke is going to still have a strong showing once he got past the debate. I did make mention this weekend when the Yankees were playing the Boston Red Sox in London in the first inning, the Yankees went out to a 6-0 lead and the Red Sox tied at 6-6 in the bottom of the first, prompting me to say, like in baseball, politics never ends in the first inning. So we've just barely gone to the first inning here. So I guess what do they need to do? What do the candidates need to do in advance of that next debate? What are they trying to work on?
Well, I think the first thing that's going to happen is that these new fundraising totals are going to come out today. The period for the second quarter just ended, and there's been a surprise in terms of the amount of money that some of the candidates have gotten, particularly Buttigieg. We also saw a report that the amount of money that was raised by Cory Booker and Harris was much larger than maybe they would have anticipated before the debates. The second thing is going to be the issue of the public opinion polls. And we've seen sort of a slight drop in the inevitability of Joe Biden being the candidate. He lost about 5 percentage points since the debates, and Harris picked up some of that. We also see the nip and tuck between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. They're challenging each other. So what I think we have to recognize, and I think you make a very good point about this, is that we're a long way off. We're almost 500 days from the presidential election in 2020. A lot can happen. And I think what happens is that candidates, when they're running this marathon, are going to find periods in which they're going to do really well and other times in which they're going to stumble. And when they stumble, part of that is maybe not such a bad thing because we see how they respond. We see their temperament. We see their ability to adapt. And that's a very important trait for a president to have, not just to sort of always have a perfect showing. That's one of the reasons why we look to these debates, to see the matchup of these men and women side by side, presenting their case, arguing, sometimes not as effectively as they might, but how they come back and clean it up the next day or two or over the stump. And it gives the public a better understanding about who these people are.
Dr. William Rosenberg. Bill, thanks so much.
All right. Well, have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too. And a great fourth. Dr. William Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University, joins us from time to time. He's co-author of News Verdicts, the debates and presidential campaigns, looking at last week and what's ahead for these Democratic candidates. He is tweeting at Dr. B. Rosenberg at DRB ROSENBERG.